I, Chair Chris Beyer, call the virtual Board of Boiler Rolls board meeting of September 14th, 2021 to order at, I have 9:28 a.m. Debbie, could you please take the roll?
Okay. Chair Chris Beyer.
Present.
Vice Chair Roger Hendricks.
Present.
Thank you. Blake Alexander.
Present.
Thomas Ingstrom.
Present.
Ryan Garvey.
Present.
Patrick Lamb.
Present.
Thank you. Greg Moyer.
Here.
Okay, and Jeffrey Rodert.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a quorum.
Thanks, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this point, does anybody have any changes needed to the agenda? Hearing none, I, Chair Beyer, roll the agenda and order of business approved. The approval of the board draft meeting minutes from June 1st, 2021. Any changes, corrections, or additions? Hearing none, I, Chair Chris Beyer, roll the draft minutes of June 1st, 2021 final. The date of our next meeting is December 7th, 2021. I don't see any public comments. So we'll move into reports with the boiler program update. Chief Clark, would you like to give us an update, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. This is Tom Clark, Chief Boiler Inspector with the division. I have a couple things I'd like to present to the board today. First, just a quick update on code adoption. Again, I want to thank the board and the committee members for their time and participation in getting the 2021 boiler code put together. We are currently at the point where everything is in place. Our rules have all been pushed out to the Secretary of State. We are ready to go, and the rules will be in effect October 1st. So if anyone on the board or those attending remotely have any questions about the new code updates, please feel free to reach out anytime. Next, overdues. The last numbers that we presented back in the June meeting were that the state was at 17% overdue and insurance companies were at an average of 22% overdue. And at the time, we thought those were really great numbers. We've been seeing them trend down over the last year or so coming through COVID. And I'm really happy to announce that as of the end of August, the state is down to 14% overdue and insurance is at an average of 21% overdue, which is, again, a great improvement. I think, at least on the state side, this improvement is a combination of factors. One, we had our two newest inspectors really getting out in full swing, which was a big help. They've both been performing really well. And then the second factor was just, at least for a while there, we were seeing the state start to open back up from COVID. Some restrictions were starting to get lifted. I think we were having more opportunities to get into sites. We may see that quiet back down a little bit. We may see the improvement taper off a little bit as we see restrictions going back into place with the Delta variant, but I'm positive and hopeful that we can keep this trend going. Lastly, unfortunately, I do have an accident to report. Luckily, there were no injuries or deaths involved in this accident. There was a fire tube power boiler in a lumber mill outside of Springfield, and unfortunately, it experienced both a primary and secondary low water cutout failure. So the device continued to boil without getting more makeup water and eventually dry fired. This dry firing caused a number of tubes to be severely bent and warped and a few ruptured. This led to the boiler actually tripping out on flame failure from the steam and water leaking from the tubes into the fire side of the boiler. The insurance inspector for that location performed an investigation. The division also investigated as well. We found that for the most part, the low water cutouts seemed mechanically sound. The chambers were clear. There was no debris present whatsoever. The owner of the boiler had a company come out and tested the electronics, and it seemed that perhaps there was an electronic failure at fault. The boiler was damaged enough that it has been removed from service and is in the process of being replaced. As part of our investigation, we discussed a little bit about lessons learned with the equipment owner, and we think that one potential improvement is in the way they utilize their trained operator. The trained operator, as required by rules, was on site but was not in the boiler room at the time of the accident. And we had a discussion about making more frequent rounds and the importance of doing frequent testing and log taking on power boilers. And the equipment owner intends to put those plans into place. That's all I have for program updates. Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we have a legislative update. Julia's here to discuss the bills that directly affect our boiler program. Julia, are you ready to speak?
I am. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. Good morning, Chair Byer, Vice Chair Hendricks, and members of the board. For the record, my name is Julia Hier, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. I am here to present a legislative update on Oregon's 2021 legislative session, which began back in January of 2021, and it came to a close on June 26, 2021. There were a lot of bills this session that affect Building Codes Division. The purpose of the update is to provide a high-level overview of those bills, which we think would be of most interest to the board. In your packet, you'll find a copy of the bills we're discussing today. If you're looking at that document online, there are links to the bill summaries on the table of contents. So if you click on what bill is of interest, it'll jump you down to the summary. And then in the bill itself, there's a link to in the summary itself, there's a link to the bill. There's a lot of information within the bills, so it is a high-level overview and a quick summary of our next steps. There are also 12 bills that I will not discuss that are significant to the division, but not directly relating to the Board of Boiler Rules. And so in the interest of time, I'm skipping over those, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about those or any other of the bills. So I'll get started here and start off with Senate Bill 866, which is our program delegation bill. This bill corrects issues that were identified by the Department of Justice relating to program delegation. It permits a municipality or the Department of Consumer and Business Services to contract with a person to administer and enforce a building inspection program and to act as a building official. The bill further specifies conditions under which a municipality may procure services from a contract building official, and the bill will take effect at the first of the year. We are implementing the bill with rulemaking, training, and enforcement when necessary, relating to assumption of the building inspection program. We just finished the RAC, the Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting on this on August 30th of 2021, and are working to finalize proposed rules that will be filed with the Secretary of State. There'll be an opportunity for additional feedback on those rules in a rulemaking hearing. We're also working to develop the training program for qualified employees and contract building officials who can now approve commercial building inspections. For the qualified employee, there'll be 2 trainings, a basic one and an advanced training that has to be completed within 180 days of being designated as a qualified employee. Moving on to House Bill 2415, this relates to electronic processes. I see the bill in 2 parts. There's Section 1 that requires us to adopt rules to establish minimum standards and statewide consistency in electronic processes for reviewing plans, issuing permits, and performing field inspections. This part of the bill takes effect later this month. And then we've got a second part of the bill that sections 2 and 3 that does not become operative until 2025. That new law requires municipalities that administer and enforce a building inspection program to use our electronic system for access to building codes information, or to use a system that's equivalent to our system. And it requires municipalities that administer and enforce a building inspection program to meet minimum standards that we adopt regardless of whether they use the equivalent system. So for the first section of the bill, we're getting ready to, we're working on organizing a rulemaking advisory committee meeting as summer construction season comes to a close. That will be announced shortly. And within that rulemaking advisory committee meeting, we'll be seeking input related to section 1 of the bill, but also some information from sections 2 and 3. Once we get sufficient input related to section 1, we'll file proposed rules. On sections 2 and 3, in addition to utilizing the RAC, we'll be using that to help explore terminology in the bill. One example is the bill talks about electronic field inspections. So exploring what the Rulemaking Advisory Committee may suggest for further defining that. We may also pursue some pilot programs to iron out details for the system. And we'll have meetings with contractors and building officials to seek additional ideas and hope to iron out the details of that section of the bill in 2023. And that would give municipalities enough time to create their own system by the effective date of January 1 of 2025. Moving on to Senate Bill 762. This is a wildfire bill. It is very extensive. Some parts do not relate to the Building Codes Division, other parts do. I tried to give an overview of each section, and then in bold are the items that more relate to BCD. So I'll run through those briefly here. The first part relating is there's a direction for the State Board of Forestry to establish criteria for developing and maintaining a statewide map of wildfire risk that displays risk classes. Those are defined as extreme, high, moderate, low, and no risk. And then that map is going to be populated into an Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer, which must be made publicly available in an electronic format. Oregon State University is being consulted with and helping to develop and maintain that map. And there's opportunity for public input in that process, and there's an ability to appeal any wildfire risk class assignments. The map has to be completed by June 30th of 2022. And then that Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer is declared as the official wildfire mapping, planning, and risk classification mapping tool for the state. So then Section 12 of the bill directly relates to us, and it pulls in that wildfire risk class information. So for those extreme and high wildfire risk classes in the wildland-urban interface that are identified in Section 7 of the bill, we have to adopt wildfire hazard mitigation building code standards that apply to new dwellings and the accessory structures of dwellings as described in Section R327 of the 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. The actions will take place by October 1st of 2022, but the standards will not be operative until April 1 of 2023, and they have to be incorporated into any updates of the ORSC. We will also amend Section 327 of the ORSC to include standards for additions to existing dwellings and accessory structures, and for the replacement of existing structures, of existing exterior elements covered in the current R327. Again, with doing that by October 1st of 2022, but operative April 1, 2023, and incorporating updates in the ORSC. Then not more than 2 years after the standards stated in the 2 bullet points above are adopted, DCBS will update Section R327 of the ORSC to accomplish certain requirements in the bill. We will also develop and maintain an interactive mapping tool that displays at the property level wildfire hazard mitigation standards covered in Section R327 of the ORSC. The tool will be designed to support future inclusion of snow load, seismic, and wind building code standards at the property level, and will also be developed not more than 60 days after the statewide map of the wildfire risk is developed. Again, OSU collaboration, and it's displaying it in an electronic format available to the public at no charge. and periodically updating the tool as relevant building code information is updated, and also an ability to enter into an agreement with OSU concerning services required to be developed and maintained in the tool. The final component here that is directly relevant to us is the establishment of the Wildfire Program Advisory Council. DCBS will be involved in that council with providing a 15% of a full-time employee to cooperatively staff the council, attend meetings as informational resources, assist with drafting reports at the request of the council, and to support the work of the State Wildfire Programs Director. So we've got rulemaking and code work that will likely be in full swing come next summer. Updated codes taking effect October 1 with that 6-month phase-in. And then 2 years later, so October of 2024, updating the R327 in accordance with the requirements of the bill, maintaining the map and collaborating with OSU. And then we'll also be available to participate in that Wildfire Program Advisory Council. 2 more bills here that are not quite as extensive. We've got House Bill 2560. It's remote meetings and testimony. It requires a governing body of a public body to the extent reasonably possible to make all meetings accessible remotely to members of the general public through technological means, and to provide an opportunity for members of the general public to remotely submit oral and written testimony when that type of testimony is allowed in person. It imposes the same requirements on hearings under chapters 197 and 215, taking effect the first of the year. So this means for us that we're going to continue to make our meetings accessible remotely to the general public, and will allow remote oral and written testimony in all situations where that testimony would be allowed in person. And then finally, we've got House Bill 2992. It's compensation to board members. The bill modifies the amount of compensation paid to members of the state boards and commissions, and it also requires state boards and commissions to pay compensation and expenses to certain members with an adjusted gross income below a certain threshold. The bill provides that members may decline to accept compensation of reimbursement, and the bill will take effect on September 25th of this year. So be on the lookout in the near future with some communication with additional details on the bill. A letter will go out to each of the board members with information about how to apply for that compensation if you are eligible. You can also click on that bill sign there, and that will bring you to the language of the bill that outlines all the details as well if you wanted to look in advance. So that summarizes all of the information I was going to present today, but I am happy to answer any questions anyone may have. Right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no communications, no appeals. Moving on to new business. Okay. We're requesting the board approval to solicit for membership of a work group to consider extension of inspection cycles for owners and operators of boilers. Tyler, would you mind introducing this and discussing the process that needs to occur?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. Mr. Chair, if I may briefly before this, we moved through the public comment section, but I didn't ask if anyone was signed in to have a register a public comment that has called in and did not register in advance. So is there anyone connected today who wishes to make a public comment? I'm not hearing anyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me on that. So this item, the division is asking the board to approve us to solicit participants for a work group which will consider the extension of inspection cycles for owners and operators of boilers. As the board may recall, due to the impacts of the COVID-19 health crisis, the divisions received several inquiries regarding the availability of extensions to inspection cycles for boilers, and the desire for a nimble approach to these inquiries has only been amplified by COVID, obviously. In response to these inquiries, at our meeting in on June 2nd, the board approved some proposed rule language, and a public hearing was held on July 21st of 2020. to hear public comment on the proposed rulemaking. There was not any, and the permanent rules took effect on October 1st of 2020. And at the December 1st, 2020 board meeting, several Oregon pulp and paper industry members expressed concern regarding the boiler inspection cycles currently in place and the rule language from that previously mentioned rule. Chair Beyer requested the board form a work group and discuss these concerns. So the division is now requesting the board's approval to solicit participants in this work group that the chair requested. The work group will consider the concerns raised by the pulp and paper industry regarding the inspection cycles. The division welcomes suggestions from the board about participants for this work group, as well as areas of discussion that would be of interest to the board. So any feedback that can be provided on those would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will require a motion. Excuse me, this will not require a motion. This is just feedback and appropriateness of this item.
Thanks, Tyler. Is there any further discussion on this topic? I know we've talked before about it, but I want to give it just a little more airtime. Okay, hearing none. Tyler, please just a little clarification. You just said it doesn't require a motion. It does require a vote, correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, it does require a vote, or at least unanimous approval of the board. It's not a formal motion as such.
Okay.
I stand corrected, Mr. Chair. It does require a motion from the board, and the board can take a look at their help sheets for some proposed rule language and come up with the language they feel is appropriate for this motion.
Okay, thanks. One further question, if anybody might know the answer. If we do give approval to form a committee, how do you look for filling it? Like, is there a quota that you're looking for, and from what demographic are you wanting? Do you want some board members and public, or does that need to be in the motion?
Mr. Chair, it can be, certainly, if that's what you feel is appropriate, or if the members of the board feel it's appropriate. However, we do try to get as diverse a group of members as we possibly can. Tom Clark can certainly respond to that as well, because he's the technical expert here as to who specifically we would be looking for. But we generally cast a wide net to members of the public who are interested, and members of the industry who are interested in participating in that work group. And certainly if the board would like to provide parameters for that, they can certainly do so.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the request to solicit the membership of a work group to consider the extension of inspection cycles for owners and operators of boilers. Anybody opposed to that? I don't hear anybody.
I'll second the motion.
Thanks, Roger. Debbie, will you take a roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. Blake Alexander,
I accept.
Thomas Engstrom,
Yes.
Ryan Garvey,
I accept.
Patrick Lamb,
No.
Greg Moyer,
Yes.
Jeff Rodert,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roger Hendricks, Chair Chris Beyer.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thanks, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on to review and approve the committee recommendations for continuing education courses and instructor applications. Tyler, would you please discuss this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. For this round of continuing education applications, the committee reviewed 4 applications from 2 organizations. If you'll notice from the matrix, 1 course was recommended for approval and 3 instructors were recommended for approval. If you would like to ask any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer those. Otherwise, Mr. Chair, this will require a motion.
Sorry. Thanks, Tyler. Is there any further discussion on this? Hearing none, we have a motion to approve the recommendations for approval or denial of courses or instructors.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to call for the roll?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Blake Alexander,
Yes.
Thomas Ingstrom,
Yes.
Ryan Garvey,
Yes.
Patrick Lamb,
Yes.
Greg Moyer,
Yes.
Jeff Rodert,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roger Hendricks,
Yes.
and Chair Chris Beyer.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Thanks, Debbie.
You're welcome.
Okay, that concludes new business. We have no announcements. So being no further business, the meeting is adjourned at 9:54 a.m. Thank you all.